Welcome to the Dive Bar Music Club podcast, where the guest hosts drop in and out, but the opinions are always passionate and the playlists loud. It's like Cheers if everyone at the bar had a strong take on 90s alt-rock or a suspicious number of burned CDs. Around our table, you'll find an emerging touring songwriter, a former cult band favorite whose work since then is even more interesting, a portrait photographer with a not-so-secret metal penchant, a record store owner who learned about Swifties the hard way, a retired folk singer who regrets nothing, and a zine maker with more cool music projects than we can count. We're all just here to share what we're currently obsessed with and maybe convince someone that yes, that weird Icelandic synth folk band is worth a listen. Okay, that last one's probably me, Sloane Spencer. It's Dive Bar Music Club. Low-key, high taste, happy hour for music nerds. Welcome back to Dive Bar Music Club. I'm Sloane Spencer, and we're hanging out today at the Low-Key High Taste Music Club with Chad Cochran, Charles Hale, and Nelson Gullett. If you had a chance to listen to our early bio episodes, you're caught up on who they are. We've had Charles join us on a previous episode as well. Really looking forward to chatting about the music that everyone has chosen to talk about today. But also, we want to frame it in the context of what has been going on with the federal incursion occurring in the Minneapolis area. I've always been a huge fan of the Minneapolis music scene and the community, and one of my very first road trips that I did on my own related to music was driving up to Minnesota and going to all of the venues along Lake Street. Y'all might know that band Lake Street Dive. Well, they literally named themselves after all the music venues along Lake Street. And I was a big Replacements fan, so I had to go to all of those places and, of course, check out First Avenue with Prince. Well, Minnesota and the greater area has obviously been dealing with unprecedented violence from federal officers, and it's been against the people who live in the area. And the creative community has really stepped up in ways to protect themselves and protect their community while also letting it be clear that this is not what they're looking for, and this is not how they will allow violence to occur in their area. And so as we are here, hanging out pretending we're sitting at a bar chatting, this is the kind of thing that people need to be talking about. If you're not talking about this with people in your day-to-day life, you need to be doing that. So as we chose the music today, where are you all feeling that the world of creative people in general is in response to what's been going on?
I mean, I guess I can jump in with this. As you live on social media these days, as I'm sure a lot of us do, you see artists speaking up here and there, saying things. I'm sure a lot of us watched the Grammys the other night, and we heard Bad Bunny and Billie Eilish on the bigger level, artists wearing pins. There's a lot of folks out there calling attention to things like this. We had Bruce Springsteen and Billy Bragg release songs on the same day last week. I spent 45 minutes of my show last week just highlighting artists from Minneapolis. Now, I'm kind of in a position where I can call attention to a situation, but I can't speak to a specific point or side of the argument on the air. So I have to be a little careful of who I highlight and even how I highlight what they're saying. But, there are a lot of folks out there, obviously, very upset and calling attention. And you can look to people like Carsey Blanton and many others who are doing the work currently.
I was going to mention that in my record store, really starting like last January, I had people come in and they were talking to me while they were flipping through records, and sort of what they were saying over and over again was that they were coming into the store to look at records to get their mind off of all the other things that were in the world. And I feel like that's been, sort of happening for 12 months. Maybe it's at a bit of a high point right now, so that it's maybe not the necessity of music speaking to the moment, but the necessity of music providing the relief from the moment, because we're so hyper aware of what's happening. maybe in the 60s, 70s, music is informing people of things that are happening. I feel like we don't necessarily need that from music right now, because all the news is on our phone, all the video is on our phone. So I'm fine with protest songs, obviously. I would just say there's also something to the idea that music can get your brain away from all that negativity.
Yeah, I will even add on to that. I think that what Charles is saying is a really interesting point, and not so much based in escapism, because I don't think that exists. You know, we are peppered every single day with news stories. We are inundated by design an astronomical amount of information. And I think that with art and with music, at least speaking for me personally, it has provided me an opportunity to deflect temporarily, to be able to find, solace in something else, or to redirect my energy into something that is soothing to me. Because I think the reality of anybody who is watching what's happening, anybody who is potentially highly empathetic, this is an incredibly difficult time to try to, allow your body or encourage your body to process all of the information that's happening. It kind of gets back to that. How are we taking care of ourselves? And so because I do a mental health series, talk to a lot of folks, and a lot of it is about, not burying your head in the sand, but at the same time, making sure that you are taking care of your brain.
Mm-hmm. I will also add that sometime last December, January, or whatever, I started playing The Clash on my radio program more frequently. And basically every time I play The Clash, all I say is, it seems like a good time to play The Clash on the radio, and then just play the song. I think anybody who has half a bit of awareness understands sort of why it's a good time to play The Clash on the radio.
I can feel that as well. I find myself playing protest songs from other eras that possibly speak to the moment, but making it clear, hey, this song is from 2004. This song is from 1965. Like, I don't want my audience to think that I'm hammering a current point, but I'm also like, this is something that's been going on for a long time. And there are songs from the past that speak to this moment. There's been a ton of discourse on social media lately. Where are all the protest songs for today? And, I talked about some people that are doing it today, but you almost don't need it, because some of this stuff has existed for so long that the music is already there. But also, I like the points you guys are making too about you need not just music that speaks to the moment, but music that can maybe help you escape a little bit. And Mavis Staples is that voice for me when I need to just kind of step away and ground myself in something. I look to Mavis.
It's interesting to hear you all talk about this, because it helps put some words to how I kind of mentally categorize the music that I turn to when all of this is feeling very overwhelming to me. And, how can I feel overwhelmed? I'm overwhelmed because of social media and my friends who are directly experiencing this. One of my closest friends lives in St. Paul, and I'm not in the middle of it physically at all, but it's definitely overwhelming. And talking about the mental health impact vicariously and feeling unable to do anything to make a difference, and, except when we're able to amplify, again, back to that whole social media thing, which is the plus and the minus, or some of us are able to, donate money or support in other ways, but that doesn't feel meaningful in the same kind of way. But also there's value in taking care of yourself so that you can, that whole butterfly effect thing, that the small things that you can do that add up when everyone else does them as well. One of our other panelists, named Amanda Miles, has a category of music she refers to as rage music.
And to me, there's sort of a few categories of music that help me in these times. And rage music is definitely one of them. And then protest music. And I tend to go back to like Marvin Gaye. I'm a huge Marvin Gaye fan. And how are all of those lyrics still so pertinent today is mind-boggling. But I also turn towards hope music. And if we get around to talking about the ones I chose today, it's not hope without information and Pollyanna hope. It's hope that somehow we will move forward together in a better way, which is a bit idealistic every time I open my phone and look at the news. But it brings up, where are you all feeling about the songs that y'all talked about for this week?
I will say that for me personally, I think that we probably have some commonalities, Sloane. We've talked about this offline. I have ADHD, late diagnosis when I was 50 years old. And so it really depends on the day. Someday I will be like the biggest pop punk fan in the world. And then other times I will be comparing Nirvana and Weezer. So it just like depends on what my brain chooses to hyperfixate on. But to kind of play off of what you were saying earlier, I too find like different areas that I tend to go to. I do like music that I don't listen to a lot when I need to soothe, like LCD Sound System, Radiohead, like things that challenge my brain a little bit. And a lot of the songs that I have on the playlist today are pop punk. So, not like a Rage Against the Machine, but Iron Chic and the Menzingers and those kind of bands that, for me, I am a mediocre guitar player. And a lot of times during my day between work calls, I will put on a loud song, plug in my guitar and play and try to have like 3.5 minutes of like, get that energy out. And pop punk is a lot of where I end up going back to when I need to burn some of that off.
Chad, one of the interesting things to me about one of the bands that you mentioned, because this was a band I was not familiar with, but you talked about Off With Their Heads and their song Clear the Air. That really stuck out to me because not only is it the pop punk, and you could listen to that and just get the feel right away, but that is really speaking pointedly to some mental health and emotional content that you don't always see in music of that same vibe.
Yeah, it's interesting is that, as much as I kind of push back on digital access to streaming, there have also been some benefits of it where, when I was younger, I would go hang out in record stores and whatever they were playing over the speakers is, 9 times out of 10 is what I walked out of the record store with because I wanted to get turned on to new music. And Off With Their Heads is one of those bands that just happened to be a suggested band. I had seen their album covers because I am fascinated with like the art of album covers. And so I had seen that before. And I finally dug in one day and I was like, oh, I love this band. Like they're great. And they are aggressive and they do have some very poignant lyrics. And if anybody hasn't checked them out, there's my plug. I would highly check out Off With Their Heads.
Yeah, this song really jumped out to me too the first time I heard it. I'm kind of like Sloane. Like I maybe had a Jimmy Eat World record in college, but pop punk hasn't been a vein for me. But, you get to the chorus of this song and it's just, I'm falling apart, but it's cathartic. It's not wallowing. It can be one of those rage music kind of songs that I think it could help you get some of those feelings out, but also leave you in a better place when the song is over. I really liked this one that you brought to the table, Chad.
Cool. So I had never heard them before I started listening to this song. And immediately it made me smile, but it also kind of made me laugh a little bit, like in a good way, because it's just lyrically, it's so straightforward and it's like middle-age angst. It's not teenage angst. It's middle-age angst. And there's no hiding it. It's just so straightforward, in your face, which you could probably call courageous. to just sort of lay it out like that. And I'm not a genre guy, like, oh, is this an example of this genre, or is it this genre? But this song and the Menzinger song that Chad suggested, I was just like listening in my car last night, and I was like, wait a second. Is this what they mean by emo? Like that it's just so out there and emotional. And I've never really listened to the bands that people call emo. And I don't even care if these two are emo, but that's just what it made me think of. And it was fun to just hear a guy, well, two guys on that song and the Menzinger songs, just be sort of that forward. I mean, there was a line in one of those songs complaining about student loan payments. And it was like, that was brilliant.
I really found appreciation for all three of these ones that you brought, particularly Chad, because that's not the kind of music that I typically lean towards. And so then I was like, okay, download album.
Excellent.
So I'm curious, Nelson, when you were talking a little bit about music with the catharsis of it. And that's something I think you and I both find in common in a lot of our music, although you and I also have kind of different taste in music. You brought some interesting ones to the table this time that, again, I'm always amazed how you find these wonderful artists that I didn't know, but then one that was also someone I was going to mention. So how did you kind of stumble upon the things you've been listening to lately?
Well, I guess let's start with Monrovia, because I think that's kind of pertinent to the conversation we've been having. Monrovia put out a new record kind of the first week of January. It was the first major release kind of in the Americana world. I was not familiar with his music until last fall when I went to Americana Fest. And, Americana Fest is one of those things where there's 300 bands and 15 venues spread all over Nashville. So you kind of have to have a plan of attack, and you're going to miss something. I had been at Jack White's Blue Room at the Jade Bird show and had somewhere else to go. And I noticed that Monrovia was coming up next. And I'm like, oh, I don't know who that is. I've got to get to another gig. As I was walking out the door, Ann Powers was walking in, and I had that moment of, this is probably the show I should be at because Ann Powers is here. But I went back and I started listening to his music, and he is from the nation of Liberia. He was born in the middle of the Liberian Civil War. He lost both of his parents before he was 7 years old. He was adopted by Christian missionaries and brought back to the United States, where he ended up in Chattanooga and kind of grew up listening to folk music. And there's a bunch of those artists out there right now in the Americana world who immigrated from Africa. When you talk about John Mook, who came over from Uganda, you talk about Andara, who moved to Minnesota specifically because he loved Bob Dylan so much. He came to the U.S. to kind of follow the path of Dylan. Uwade, Joy Olatakun has immigrant parents, and you can go on and on and on down that list. And Monrovia is just the most recent example with a new album. And I chose the song Heavyfoot because it is one of the more up-tempo songs on the album, and it speaks to a little bit of, kind of social justice and things of that nature. But I thought he had a really interesting story, and, a lot of the quote unquote reasoning that's being used for what's happening in Minnesota is Somalis and African immigrants. And I just wanted to kind of highlight who some of those people are in my world who are doing some amazing work right now.
The album is great, and that song is catchy as hell and sing along after the first time, which I always love.
Yeah. And
Nelson, I'm so glad that you added this, because one of the music festivals that I work with every year is the Nelsonville Music Festival, which is in southeastern Ohio. Okay. Truly just like the middle of nowhere. But that festival is a gem. And every year, the talent buyer it seems like he has a crystal ball, because he's so far ahead of like what I'm listening to. And like, I remember the year that he had, like last year he had MJ Lenderman. Nobody knew who he was. A couple years prior to that, they had announced that Japanese Breakfast was playing. And then, she played on Saturday Night Live. Coincidentally, They just did their first round of announcements for bands, and Monrovia was one of the initial bands that were announced. And I was like, I don't really know who that is. Like, I'm, every year I get turned on to somebody else. So the fact that within this circle, everybody's aware of who that is, I am super excited to dive further into that record because that song is fantastic.
Yeah, it's just, like I said, I apply the Ann Powers litmus test. If she's onto something, I'm going to check it out. And it seems like, when you have a local festival, or there's a little festival in Knoxville that happens, that Devin Gilfillian was here a few years ago, and no one knew who he was. And you find the venues and the festivals that seem to be booking a year ahead of the zeitgeist, and we've got Big Ears coming up in Knoxville next month, and I'm excited to just see what I can find there. But if you've got a festival, especially some of those smaller festivals, like you mentioned, Nelsonville, we had a little festival in Moorhead, Kentucky when I was in college that you might have seen the Jesse Wells, who plays with Tyler Childers, and also Chris Stapleton in a little string band together. And that was 25 years ago.
Wow.
So you can definitely find some gems at some of these places.
I love a small festival. I'm a huge fan of one in my state called Albino Skunk Music Festival. It's the same kind of thing. I feel like I'm tapped into the music, and then they find people that I'm like, who the heck is this? And it's always my new favorite band. Always.
Absolutely.
So Charles, what have you been listening to?
So I'm sort of going in a different direction, and I will say my choices really had nothing to do with what we were talking about earlier. But my first choice is a band called The Third Mind. I got introduced to The Third Mind just a couple of months ago. A customer walked into my store, asked me if I was into them, and I was like, I don't know what they are. And then he told me, and I went and listened, and I'm shocked at how much I've enjoyed their music in the last couple of months. Like many people in my younger days, I had a dirty hippie jam band past, and I don't have that now. So The Third Mind is definitely a psychedelic band, and it's the first jammy psychedelic band that I've been enamored with in probably 25 years. The song I chose is called The Creator Has a Master Plan. And part of what I love about this band is that their repertoire is all covers or mostly covers, but it expands the songbook over decades and decades and all styles of music. The Creator Has a Master Plan is a jazz tune written by Pharoah Sanders that he released in 1969. So here's a psychedelic jammy band grabbing a jazz tune from 1969 and sort of doing their version of it. Also, on their records, they do songs from Grateful Dead and traditional tunes, but then also Alice Coltrane, who also 60s jazz harpist, but also the 13th Floor Elevators. So sort of all over the place. And probably what's most interesting about The Third Mind is who the players are.
Yeah.
I talked before about the band The Minus Five and sort of liking bands made up of veteran players that are still doing sort of fresh, interesting things. So if it's all right, I'll run down quickly who's in The Third Mind.
Yeah, definitely.
So it was sort of established by Dave Alvin, who is known for bands like the Blasters, the Knitters. He played in X for a time. But then also on bass is a guy named Victor, who played in Camper Van Beethoven and in Cracker. The singer, primarily the singer, is a woman named Jessie Sykes, who has an amazing sort of haunting, hypnotic voice. She has her own band. A guy named David, who also did some work with Camper Van Beethoven, but also played with the Counting Crows. And the drummer is a guy named Michael Jerome, who's played in the Toadies, Better Than Ezra, and Richard Thompson. So the idea is almost that they're a rock band who is approaching music like a jazz band would, of we know the basic framework of this song before we all play it, and then we sit down and improvise on those themes. And I would be curious, sort of y'all's opinions after you've heard it, like if you're a non-jam band fan, was there anything interesting in it for y'all?
Yeah, this is a band that's kind of been on my radar for a few years now because of the Dave Alvin angle, and it's a band that's made up of players that you know, but it almost doesn't sound like anything that they've done before. Sloane, it might remind you a little bit of a band like Tatara, if you know that
Agreed.
band that Peter Buck was a part of.
Agreed.
With like Skerritt and Barrett Martin, of just these guys and Jessie Sykes like coming from different places and just doing something completely new. Their first album was kind of pitched to radio as the whole thing was kind of improvisational, and it gets a little spacey and jammy. It's hard to fit into a playlist on a little bluegrass station like we do here, but it's certainly a band worth checking out. And you know, I've been a big Dave Alvin fan for a long time, and it's just it's a different chapter and a different outlet, it feels like, for some of these players.
I love the idea that someone decided it was worth the money and worth the effort of pitching this band to radio stations. There's nothing under 5 minutes.
Yeah. It's a Yep Rock Records project, or at least the earlier releases was. And, you know, and that's just kind of a label like Yep Rock or New West or some of these places. As a radio programmer, you kind of get to trust the labels and the promotions people that work there. And when they say, hey, I've got something a little different, it might not jump out to you immediately, but sit with it, give it a minute. I have the trust with the labels and the people there to say, all right, let me give this a second go over and see what I can fit in, how I can make it work. And, you know, we're an independent station. We can play a 10-minute song if we want to here and there. But, you know, it's having a history with Dave Alvin certainly helped and some of the other players. But it's a really unique project. And yeah, I'm glad you brought it into the discussion today.
I'm excited to check it out. You know, outside of not having a great track record to disprove this otherwise, I did spend many weekends on the farm at Bonnaroo, but yet I am not a big jam band fan. But considering who the players are and the foundation behind the way that they are approaching it, I'm super excited to check it out.
I was not familiar with them at all, and I appreciated the Dave Alvin was the connection that I saw visually as well. And then I was like, oh, I'll listen to this. And I kind of like how it ties back in with our previous conversation on the other episode, Charles, regarding jazz, because for me, this makes the concept of that original free jazz a lot more accessible, because jam bands, like it or not, are definitely like language I understand, even though I would not consider myself in that world at all. I really appreciate that you brought it to it. But I also am a huge fan of the kind of assemblage of well-known players. And one of the bands that I chose this time actually is exactly that, except that not so much the well-known part of it. So I went to go see Pylon Reenactment Society, which is Pylon, the Athens, Georgia essential proto-punk band. They did not reform, and I respect the way they did this. They said Vanessa put the band back together and said, we are a new band who is playing the songs of Pylon and whatever we create together, because Pylon will never be again because Randy Booley had passed away. I super respect the way she did this. So Pylon Reenactment Society was playing at Star Bar in Atlanta, which is the quintessential fantastic neighborhood dive bar with fantastic music. So I went to go see them a couple of years ago at this point, maybe even 3 years ago. I have no concept of time. And one of the opening, I always want to see the opening bands. One of the opening bands was a band called Waiting for UFOs. And it's W, the number 8, ING, the number 4, UFOs. Never heard of them. And then like 12 people get on stage. And it's a teeny tiny little dive bar. And I mean, honestly, they were like elbow to elbow and they had a guy playing cello. They were literally touching each other. And I was sitting at the bar and I was like, what the hell is this? There is so much going on. There was someone playing a trash can. There was someone playing an entire organ setup, and there were keyboards, and there was violin, and there was guitar, and there were drums. And I just was overwhelmed with all of what was happening. And I posted something online of, y'all, I just saw this band. I don't know who they are. Someone said they're called Waiting for UFOs, and they remind me of the late 80s, early 90s spoken word poetry that was very popular in Atlanta. And we used to go see a lot back in the day of Deacon Lunchbox and the Jody Grind. And so that era of Atlanta creativity. And I said, I have no idea who these dudes are, but this is what it reminds me of if we were in the 2020s. Well, turns out that's exactly who these people were. And I had no idea. So it's a project from Bill Taft, who is Atlanta legend musically. I guess I've known Bill since the days of Chowder Shouters, probably. So many just very local, maybe regional to the point of like maybe played Alabama, maybe played North Carolina a little bit, but very much local. Part of that whole scene, Cabbagetown, I think is having a heyday in terms of resurgence due to some work done by Chunklet right now with Henry Owings. Very Atlanta-centric. But the person that you all probably know who came out of this world is Kelly Hogan, the singer who sings with Mavis Staples. And Waiting for UFOs is just weird and important and connects that whole political spoken word poetry to noise music and visual art. And the song I chose was called Cyborg Ringo, mainly because it's kind of memorable as you listen to it over and over. You'll have that little Cyborg Ringo in your head, whether you want to or not. But visually and artistically, I really appreciate what they're doing, even though it's weird. But there's people like one of the guys, Billy Fields in the band from Follow for Now and from Arrested Development. And you've got Brian Halloran on cello, just all of these people who have been part of a local music scene forever. And Will Fratesi, I mean, drummer who, by the way, had an accident a while back, and I think they're still recovering. Just that hyper-local connection to the bar. Star Bar did a fundraiser for the band when they were having health issues. It's that community aspect of local legends just made me really want to share who these people are, even though outside of this niche of weird Atlanta music, I don't know that anyone knows who they are.
I'm unbelievably excited to listen to more of them, partly because I also have a stand-up poetry past, but I also like weird things. I've been to the Star Bar a couple of times, and it's a great place. I was too young growing up in Georgia to go when like the Jody Grind and Deacon Lunchbox and those people were playing, but I know the names. And I also know of the Star Bar from the Drive-By Truckers song, The Living Bubba.
Yeah.
And 20-something years ago, 25 years ago, in my college radio station, I'm looking through the compilation CDs. And The Living Bubba was a guy, Gregory Dean Smalley. He put together a festival for a number of years called Bubba Palooza. And so I'm going through the compilation CDs in my college radio station here in Colorado, and I see one called Bubba Palooza. And I pull it out, and it's a compilation of all those bands that, Sloane, that you just mentioned.
Yep.
That played the Star Bar. And it's it's weird and all over the place. And at that time, those bands had probably stopped playing 10 or 15 years before. And now to learn that some of those players are still getting together and playing and making new music and playing in the same bar is just, as a history buff, it's ridiculously exciting.
I didn't realize that you had any connection to any of that. Yeah, Bubba is amazing. I think I have Polaroids from some of the early Deacon Lunchbox hosting stuff down in Little Five Points. I think I posted them online at some point and they got picked up by somebody. Anyway, my creative background is in performance art, and I got started in that whole weird live performance art scene in Atlanta. And so I overlapped with a lot of these people, and there was a tragic car wreck that killed a couple of the members of the Jody Grind on the way back from a gig in Alabama. And it kind of, between that and heroin, really decimated that community. Benjamin from Smoke, Opal Fox Quartet, a very hyper local but very interconnected scene. It made me so excited to still see the people who are still here continuing to create and continuing to be weird. I think that's such an important part of art. I love beautiful things, but also I like people who make me go, what are you doing? And why?
Why is the great question.
I just want to quickly say, God bless those late 90s, early 2000s college radio compilation CDs. Somewhere I have a binder full of those things that people would send that were just such great discovery tools. I can't even count. I think I first heard the -5 that was mentioned earlier. I first heard them on one of those compilations. Invaluable resource for the music nerds who were. I was just working in the newsroom at my college station. I wasn't even involved in music yet, but I grabbed every single one of those that I could.
Same. Such a great music discovery tool.
And just for the record, I 100% stole that CD. I still have it.
As you should.
It's not in the radio station. It's in my storage unit somewhere.
It should be. With you, that is. But yeah, that brings up a whole thing about discovery. We've talked about it a little bit. And Chad, you were saying earlier today about, the algorithm actually did you right in turning up Off With Their Heads for you. But music discovery is at such a weird place right now for all of us. How is it working? It's changing. As we speak, what I would have told you 3 years ago is different than what I would say now. How are y'all finding the music that isn't already within your world?
Yeah, I will echo what you all just said about, I remember I had a subscription to CMJ.
Oh, yeah.
And it was such I grew up in incredibly rural Ohio, less than a couple thousand people. The line I always use is I lived in town and there was still a cornfield across the street from me. And I remember CMJ and New Music something. I forget what that magazine was.
NME.
They would send.
Express.
Yeah, that's it. Yep. And so I would get those compilation CDs, and that would, I got those all through college too, because it was just such a great way to discover new music. But today, I have a decent social media presence everywhere, and I wanted to do something a little bit different. Somebody who had done some PR for me in the past had encouraged me to get on TikTok. And I was like, I don't really know what that is. This was several years ago. I thought it was the dancing app, and that's kind of all I knew it for. And she's like, no, just pick something and go talk about it. I'm like, oh, well, I'll talk about music. I'll do something different. I don't want to talk about photography there. I'll do something different. And I've done that for a few years. I do something called follower submitted questions, where people send me questions and then I ask them, and it kind of creates this conversation around music. It's been a really cool experience for me. But I will tell you that TikTok is where I first saw Jesse Wells, not the Jesse Wells that plays with Tyler. But, that's the first time I saw him, and several other bands I've picked up from being on that app. And so it's been a really cool You have to sort through a bunch of junk. Don't get me wrong. It doesn't just, feed it to you. But once you get in the algorithm and once you start to watch a specific thing, it does a pretty good job of feeding you those, similar or in parallel type artists. And that's how I've done it recently.
Interesting. How about you, Nelson?
I mean, I have a teenager who throws a lot of things my way, mostly.
Your teenager has great taste in music, though. It's like since childhood.
She does. She gets into the pop world of the Taylor Swifts and the Chapel Roan, and I've come to appreciate a lot of that kind of stuff too. But she's a big Boy Genius fan, and she's fallen into the Lucy Dacus and all that world. I got her onto Waxahachie recently, and she'll bring me other things that are kind of parallel to that. Personally, I mean, I don't spend a bunch of time listening outside my genre just because I have a lot of stuff I have to keep up with. I do rely on the algorithms a little bit. That's where I discovered Amelia Day, who was one of the people that I wanted to bring to the conversation today. In fact,
well, hold on. Let's talk about her. Her vocal styling is amazing.
Yeah, she's going to be at Albino Skunk Festival.
No way!
Yeah, I looked that up after you mentioned it earlier in the conversation. She played for us a couple of weeks ago at the WDVX Big Plate, which is, for people who aren't familiar, for over 20 years now, WDVX has had a live performance series called the Blue Plate Special, where every Monday through Saturday at noon, we host a free live concert. And it could be the local artist who plays every other month. We've had folks recently like Amelia Day, Olivia Wolfe, Chuck Prophet came through not that long ago. But it's 45 minutes to an hour. It's free. We have an audience. We broadcast it. All of the videos are on YouTube. And I randomly discovered Amelia through the algorithm and then found out like a week later she was coming to the Big Plate. And she's a young singer-songwriter from the Northwest. She's living in Nashville these days. But there's country in her sound. There's pop. There's folk. It looks like she's going to release an EP later this year. There's some singles, some EPs that are out there, but I heard that song Margie that I brought to the discussion, and I found it instantly catchy. And I dove into the rest of her sound.
Wow.
Her show on the Blue Plate was her first radio performance with the full band, but they're out on tour right now. By the time people hear this, I think she's got some Midwest dates, and then she'll be up in the Northeast. And then the festival circuit, she'll be at Albino Skunk, Sloane, so you'll have a chance to check her out.
I had a question for Nelson about her, because I listened to the song. I thought it had a good groove and all of this, and it seemed like she was at the sort of beginning of her career. And I was just curious, is her specifically or people like her, are they able to get sort of traction on Americana radio? And does getting traction on Americana radio, does that really help artists find an audience these days?
I mean, yeah, I think it's still valuable. Americana radio specifically, the charts are a little different. So an artist has to submit their music to the chart.
Okay.
Because it's a monitored chart. So basically, every station that reports, we have a live stream that goes out over the internet. There's a company that monitors our streams, and based on the music that's been submitted to them, they can detect every time we play a song. Monrovia right now, Played Americana Fest, is getting promoted through the Americana newsletter, hasn't submitted his music to the Americana chart. So it doesn't matter how much I'm playing it, it's not being detected as spins and showing up on that chart, even though I think he's doing well in some other places. But Americana radio, I think we still have about 80 stations that report to the chart. A big hit at Americana radio usually gets on 40 to 50 of those stations, because some stations have a different style than others. Like, we're not the same as KNBT, we're not the same as WNCW. we all kind of have our different styles, but we can tell here in Knoxville, the people that we latched onto early and kind of got behind, when they come through town, they can see it in their ticket sales and the people who show up at shows.
Ah.
I mentioned Chris Stapleton earlier. He came and played our Blue Plate special when he was with the Johnson Brothers. It was after he left the Steel Drivers, before he really became what he is now. They played a Blue Plate in the middle of the afternoon and then played a show at a local pub. And he told me later that the faces he saw at the Blue Plate special were the same faces he saw at the pub that night. And the Steel Drivers have always said they do 2 shows every time they come to Knoxville, because we were playing their records before they even signed to Rounder. We were playing that live thing that they did from the station in. So I think it definitely can have an impact. I talked to Amelia after she played the show, and she was just so excited to be on this platform. And I think when she comes back through, she'll try to find a Knoxville gig too. And that's what I like is finding those artists that are new. She's been around for a couple of years, but we didn't really know her, and now she has a base. Like, I've played Knoxville before, maybe people know me there, and I can come back around. But I think you see it a lot. There's a lot of folks who get traction on Americana and then maybe crossover into some other realms, especially as Americana itself continues to grow.
That's great.
I just want to make sure that I say that anybody that hasn't listened to that Johnson Brothers record should definitely check it out, because if you like Chris Stapleton and you like to hear and you like rock and roll, it's definitely a rock and roll record. And honestly, probably although I get lumped into the Americana scene a lot because of the people I work with, I tend to be a metalhead and a rock guy, hence the pop punk songs on my playlist. But that Johnson Brothers record, definitely worth checking out.
And JT Cure, who still plays in Chris's band, the bass player, he's in the Johnson Brothers. Another Morehead State alum, when we talk about the other Jesse Wells, and just people I've known for a long, long time. And I always joke with Chris that that's kind of his pop rock record. Like, there's a lot of thinly veiled innuendo on that album, but it was a fun record, and I think a cool distraction for him after the Steel Drivers and before he went on to what he's doing now.
Any of y'all have other music that you wanted to talk about this time? I think we've left out a few. Got some good stuff on this list this time.
Oh, I was going to say, if I can just quickly highlight my last choice, a personal connection. When I got the email to ask me what songs I wanted to highlight this week, I was actually at a memorial service for Karen Reynolds. She was a local Knoxville musician. She hosted a program on WDVX for about 15 years called The Writer's Block, where she only played original songs from independent and unsigned artists.
Wow.
Because she said that's who she was and that's who she cared about. For years, my show would be on Wednesday night, and Karen would come in the studio after me, and we would have this overlap of 30 to 45 minutes every week where we just talked about life and music and what are you listening to. She introduced me to so many people. And she also had a side gig where she just helped young artists learn the music industry, how to register your songs with the big rights companies, how to manage your royalties, how to book a gig. She worked extensively with the Frank Brown Songwriting Festival. She headed up their youth education outreach. Songwriting was at the core of everything that she was. There are so many artists in Knoxville. She would work in Nashville as well that were touched by her and helped by her over the years. And I brought her song, Read the Book, because, I think it's another message that we need to hear right now. She would tell the story. She was on stage one night in Atlanta, and she heard someone in the audience, a man, say to his girlfriend, "Oh, I'm not going to like this chick." And by the end of the set, he came back to her and said, I didn't think I was going to like you. And she's like, "Yeah, I know. I heard what you said." But through her music, he was turned around and he came up to her to tell her how much he enjoyed the show. And that inspired her to write this song, Read the Book, the title track of one of her records. And she's like, "Yes, I'm who I am, but I'm also who you are. I I go to church, I pray, I love my wife just like you love your wife. And that's a song I've turned to through the years as a, I don't know, not, hey, can we all get along? Because I don't really love that sentiment, but it is kind of a message that we all have something under the surface that can unite us. And Karen was so loving and so caring and gave so much to so many artists over the years that I just wanted to put her name out there and mention her here on in our conversation.
Thank you. It's such a beautiful song, and her voice is absolutely beautiful. And I only knew her in the context of helping emerging songwriters find their way in the business, as you were talking about, like, registering your songs and all of that sort of stuff. So I didn't even know that about her, but I live in the Deep South. I grew up in the church, and this song speaks to a particular group of people that I am surrounded by of, and I don't know that I can necessarily be the right person to call this out, but to just name it, of if you really believe these things you're saying that you believe, then your actions need to follow that as well. And I think that's making it very overt for the people who missed the nuance, because somehow they're still there. Probably not listening to this podcast, but
you never know. I try to present, like, when I'm on the air, I try to keep my playlist pretty diverse and full of artists of color, artists from the LGBTQ community. And sometimes I'll say, hey, you just listened to a non-binary songwriter, but I'll present the music and then I'll tell people who they listen to after the fact, instead of, here's a bunch of artists that I'm already going to turn you off to just by telling you something about them. Maybe you like the music, and maybe now you can dig a little deeper. Amelia Day is a queer songwriter as well, and she's very upfront about that in her socials and in her bios and stuff. But if I lead with something like that on the air, I don't know who is going to turn the dial before they even hear the first note of the song.
Creatively, what have you all had going on? I know, Chad, in particular, you've had a lot happening in 2026. For the rest of y'all, or for any of you, what do you have going on this winter?
I'll go first since you said my name. Biggest thing for me is I'm doing a portrait show, and by the time this airs, that will have occurred. And it's the first I've done, I don't know, close to 70 art shows at this point in my career. But this will be the first portrait-only show that I've done that will include some of my earlier work, but also some stuff that I've done recently, as well as we're going to have an area for the I Didn't Want to Tell You series, which is my mental health series. And ramping up quickly. I'm, again, will have been in Pittsburgh shooting an album cover in early February, and will blink and it will be festival season. So quick start to the year.
Tell everyone a little bit about your I Didn't Want to Tell You music series. It's in your bio episode, but in case people didn't catch that.
The real quick, elevator speech is, I'm 54 years old. I didn't own a camera until I was 40. So very late bloomer. In 2017, I came up with an idea to incorporate some of the stories that I had been sharing with some musicians, and asked if they would submit a secret, to which they said, that sounds like a great idea. I'm not going to do it. Eventually, I changed the wording of that to, how has mental health played a role in your life? And the first 6 people I went to all immediately said yes. So those first 6 stories were published in No Depression magazine, which I always feel obligated to say is not a mental health magazine, just happens to be a Carter family lyric, and have continued to partner with music festivals during the summer, where I do backstage portraits and also hand out information about the mental health series. And it has been an absolutely fabulous experience for me.
I'm so excited for this, and I know that this will be airing slightly after your upcoming show. Also, for people who work in the music industry, there is a new tweak on the backline mental health services that are available. They now have some direct services available 24/7 by actual humans. If you look up Backline online, especially in socials, it's on my socials and Dive Bar Music Club socials, you will see that. And it is free mental health resources for people in the music industry. And I have been long involved in that aspect. I don't work with Backline specifically. I work for other organizations, but available across the U.S. So super important stuff. Nelson, I had a quick question for you, and you may have mentioned it and I may have zoned out, and I apologize if that's the case. You were talking about the lunchtime live music session that you all do Monday through Saturdays, but y'all are going through some construction right now and it's a little different. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. So, I mentioned it as a 6-day-a-week kind of thing. Right now, we're doing Friday shows at a local place called Barley's. It's like a regional chain of pizza joints, but we'll be back in May. The building that we're in the visitor center for Knoxville, and they're doing a bit of a facelift to the public area, which is where our stage is. So right now we're doing Friday shows only. I think in March we're going to start doing Thursdays and Fridays down at Barley's, but we keep that show pretty well booked up. We've got by the time this airs, it will have happened, but we've got a local band next week, Red and the Paper Flowers, a young folk band that I'm really looking forward to. Who knows who we'll have coming through in March and April, but we'll have some big ears performers on that stage when we get to March. That's the Eclectic Music Festival that happens. Ashley Capps, that started Bonnaroo, he runs that festival now. Really looking forward to see who we get for some of those shows, because there's everyone in town from, Robert Plant to Chris Thiele to Molly Abonsuin and on down the line. But we're there. We have a YouTube channel. You can watch pretty much every single show since we came back from COVID, 2022-ish. We've had a professional video team that records those and puts them up. So you can watch full performances from James McMurtry, Amelia Day, whoever, and also some single songs as well that got broken out and put up there. But we'll have about 1,000 artists a year come through that stage. And it's kind of an incredible thing that we've been doing for 20 years now.
It really is incredible. Charles, what do y'all have going on?
So I consider this creative, and I don't really care if no one else does. But yesterday for my record store, I bought a record collection of about 2,000 albums, and I'm just starting to open some of those boxes. So between now and the next time I talk to y'all, I will probably have listened to somewhere between 100 and 300 artists and albums that I've never heard before. And to me, that's incredibly interesting. The short backstory is the man that I bought these records from did not build this collection. The person who built this collection was a former record store employee, and he put his collection in this guy's basement. And these records have been sealed in boxes in this guy's basement since 1985. So,
I can't wait to hear about this.
So nothing in here is released after 1985. And so, we've been talking a lot about new music, but I also spend a lot of my time going backwards. So I have a massive sort of creative listening project / quote work ahead of me.
This will be fantastic. Can't wait to hear about it. Well, Chad Cochran, Charles Hale, Nelson Gullett, I really appreciate y'all sliding into the booth with me this week on Dive Bar Music Club.
That's the last call at Dive Bar Music Club. If you like the hang, follow the show, leave a review, and tell your algorithm, gosh darn it, we're worth it. Better yet, share your favorite episode with a friend who actually stayed for the whole set. See y'all next time for the low-key, high-taste happy hour for music nerds. Hey y'all, thanks for sliding in the booth with us here at Dive Bar Music Club. I'm Sloane Spencer, a former radio host and the creator of a ton of different podcasts over the years, including another brand new one that is completely different. It's the Gen X Sleep Podcast, Sleep with Rockstars. Subscribe today at sleepwithrockstars.com or your favorite podcast app.